A single drop of cognac trembled at the rim of a crystal glass seconds before it splashed onto snow-white linen and sent a tremor through Argento's hushed dining room. Victoria Kane, tech titan and Table 8's most feared guest, had just finished eviscerating a young server for mispronouncing saucisson, her voice sharp enough to carve marble. The next moment, Jack Harper, once a high school history teacher, now a waiter, stepped from the shadows of the pass. His apron was pressed, his jaw firm, and in his hand he held a half-empty wine bottle like a shield. "I won't serve your anger," he said low and steady. The words weren't loud, but they reverberated off the chandeliers and froze every conversation. In that heartbeat, power shifted, and the room collectively exhaled. For the first time in years, someone had found the courage to speak up. If you believe respect can topple the tallest towers, and that one brave voice can change the world, drop us a comment below and subscribe for the rest of Jack and Victoria's extraordinary journey. Jack Harper had been on his feet for 12 hours straight, weaving between gleaming tables and orchestrating the ballet of glasses and silverware with the precision of a conductor. In Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, every detail mattered: the exact temperature of the steak, the flicker of the votive candles, the perfect polish on every fork. Yet nothing in his dozen years of service had prepared him for Table 8, Victoria Kane's table. Moments ago, the young server had approached with the day's special, a house-made saucisson with heirloom mustard. The delicate sausage, cured for 30 days, was meant to be savored, its name whispered like a foreign prayer. But she had said it wrong, so season, and the rebuke was immediate. "If you can't speak with precision," Victoria had snapped, her voice resonant and cold, "why speak at all?" The laughter that followed was the collective echo of entitlement, and the boy had shriveled beneath it, retreating to the kitchen with tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. Jack felt his stomach drop. He recognized that look, the look of being voiceless in a world too loud to listen. He reached into his apron for a towel and covered his shaking hand, but he did not hesitate. Rising from the pass, he straightened his spine and walked forward through the corridor of tables. The conversation around him dimmed into a distant hum. Chefs paused mid-plating. Busboys held their trays in suspended animation. He stopped beside Table 8, where Victoria reclined back in her chair, arms folded, lips curved in a habitual sneer. The other patrons leaned away, eyes widening. The maitre d' hovered, uncertain whether to intervene. Jack, however, saw only one imperative: dignity. He cleared his throat, steady and calm. "Excuse me, Ms. Kane." His voice cut through the clatter like a scalpel. "I won't serve your anger." A hush fell so complete the only sound was the hum of the wine cooler in the corner. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the ice in her gaze finally cracking. "You... what?" she asked. Though it wasn't really a question, it was a challenge. Jack did not wilt. He set the wine bottle Cabernet from Napa decanted exactly 20 minutes ago on the table. He offered her the label to confirm its origin. "I'm not refusing to serve you," he said evenly. "I'm refusing to serve your anger." A murmur rippled across the room. Forks clinked against plates. The pianist halted mid-etude. Seated guests turned breath, caught in collective suspense. This was no longer about French sausage or medium-rare ribeye. This was about something far greater: respect. Victoria drew in a breath, voice low and measured. "You must think yourself very brave," she said, the faintest trace of amusement, or was it dread in her tone? "Or very foolish." Jack's expression softened. "Real bravery isn't measured by volume," he said. "It's measured by silence, by how long you let someone else's anger stand before you decide you deserve better." She stared at him, surveying every line of his face, as though gauging its worth. The guests watched too, leaning forward in their seats, as if they might miss the tipping point. Finally, Victoria straightened and removed her gloves, the black leather kind that were more accessory than necessity, and placed them on the table. "A toast?" Then she said, voice crystalline. She held up her wine glass. Murmurs rose in confusion. Jack lifted his glass in return. "To respect," he said, his baritone firm. He paused, letting the weight of those single words settle in every corner of the room. "And to kindness." She clinked her glass against his without looking away. For a frozen instant, the world held its breath, and then exhaled. The pianist's fingers resumed their melody, soft and tentative at first, then swelling into a hopeful theme. Jack poured her wine hand steady now and set the carafe down with care. As he stepped back, the maitre d' gave a discreet nod, the unspoken permission that Jack had just rewritten the house rules. Back in the kitchen, Jack passed through the swinging doors to a chorus of hushed whispers. Head chef Marco raised an eyebrow but offered a respectful nod. Sarah Bennett, the owner, crossed her arms and said nothing, her silence a sign of both relief and apprehension. Jack wiped his brow and squared his shoulders. In the dining room, forks had resumed their work, but the air felt different, lighter, charged with possibility. Somewhere a customer lifted her wine glass to a companion. To the waiter she whispered, "Who taught us all a lesson?" And somewhere else, a hidden phone buzzed with notifications. The clip of Jack's stand was already heading toward virality. But Jack didn't know that yet. For him, this was simply one man choosing to protect another's dignity. A small gesture in a grand palace of privilege, but as moments like this tend to do, it would echo far beyond Argento's marble walls. The heat in Argento's kitchen always hovered just below the boiling point, but on that night, it felt volcanic. Jack Harper wrapped a damp towel around his hand and dropped it onto the stainless steel prep table, his gaze unwavering as Sarah Bennett's heels clicked across the tile. The dining room's crystalline calm had given way to an electric buzz, and now behind the swinging pass doors, the owner confronted her star waiter with fury burning in her sharp blue eyes. "Jack, do you have any idea who that woman is?" Sarah's voice was low but fierce, each word punctuated by a practiced restraint honed from years of balancing investors' stakes and Michelin-starred expectations. Jack swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. In the blast of heat lamps and sizzling reduction sauces, he felt the weight of Sarah's question, not just about Victoria Kane's orbit of wealth and influence, but about the fate of Argento itself. The whispers in the dining room had already begun. "She's worth more than this entire kitchen. Word is, she could shut us down with a single phone call." Sarah had every reason to worry. He took a steadying breath and met her gaze, chin tilted just enough to convey neither defiance nor submission, but absolute certainty. "I know who I'm raising my daughter to be," he said. The words fell like a drop of cold water in the stove's steam, snapping Sarah and the rest of the kitchen brigade to attention. Sarah froze mid-stride, the spatula in her hand hovering over a pan of caramelizing onions. For a heartbeat, the only sound was garlic hitting butter. Then Jack's daughter's voice echoed in his memory. "Daddy, thank you for teaching me to stand up for people who deserve kindness." He didn't flinch now, and he wouldn't flinch later. "What exactly does that mean?" Sarah asked, her tone slightly less incendiary, curiosity warring with anxiety. Jack exhaled slowly. "It means I won't let my little girl grow up believing that money and the power that comes with it gives people the right to humiliate others. She deserves better role models than that." He gestured back through the pass doors. Steam still swirled in the Argento kitchen when a soft buzz echoed from beneath the spice rack, a phone hidden in the pocket of the line cook's apron lighting up with notifications. No one had dared glance at it during service, but now, between plating lamb rack and wiping down countertops, curiosity snapped like a snare drum. The cook slid the phone to Jack Harper as if passing a grenade. Jack's brow furrowed when he saw the screen the moment he refused Victoria Kane's order. His calm, unwavering, "I won't serve your anger," had been clipped, uploaded, and tagged with #serve respect. His jaw tightened as the little counter spun 10,000 views, 50,000, 200,000. "I think we're trending," the cook whispered, voice equal parts awe and alarm. Jack's heart sank. He hadn't intended to become spectacle. He'd simply stepped forward because someone had to. But now a digital inferno was roaring to life, and Argento's polished hush threatened to crack under its heat. By the time the pass had cleared and the last soufflé left the oven, Jack's phone, pocketed behind the counter, had exploded with text alerts, colleagues cheering him, managers demanding damage control, and reporters begging for interviews. One message from an anonymous number taunted, "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame, waiter boy." He set aside the phone and wiped his hands on his apron. Marcy's voice rose above the clatter of dishes being stacked for the dishwasher. "Jack, are you seeing this?" He shook his head. "Not here." Closing down the kitchen felt like walking through a storm. Investors and the board would call come morning. Headlines would blare about insubordination, property damages, and Yelp ratings in freefall, but all stars and fans and critics would fade. Come sunrise. Everything except the silent question that kept thumping in Jack's chest. Had he done right? His rooftop walk home cut through the hush of late-night Manhattan, neon signs winking against the dark. In his backpack, the solar system diorama, he and Mia had spent hours assembling glowing planets painted on styrofoam balls, papier-mâché rings. Cotton ball moons jostled gently, waiting for their 8-year-old astronomer to wake tomorrow. Jack pulled his coat tighter, lungs cold but clear. Up the narrow stairwell to their Brooklyn brownstone, laughter spilled from the apartment above, neighbors unwinding after dinner. His own front door opened to a warm little world, Mia's sneakers tossed haphazardly by the sink, a stack of mismatched bowls drying on a towel. She hummed Twinkle, Twinkle as she rinsed spoonfuls of yogurt off her plate hair, in a crooked ponytail, and her freckled face turned toward the tiny window. "Hey, kiddo," Jack said, slipping off his shoes and dropping his backpack by the doorway. Mia's head popped up, eyes bright. "You're late," she chided with mock sternness. "I was waiting for you." He knelt and ruffled her hair. "I got held up at work." "Vinegar or lemon juice?" she asked, holding up a bottle of dish soap in one hand and a sprayer bottle of vinegar in the other. He grinned. "Let's do lemon juice." "Your choice." Mia squeezed soap into the sink, sprayed vinegar, and wiped a bowl with practiced precision. Jack washed the last plate, shoulder brushing hers, the steady rhythm of their teamwork, a reminder of simpler battles won. When the dishes were done, Mia grabbed her diorama from his backpack and placed it carefully on the counter. "I finished Jupiter's rings," she announced, adjusting the paperclip that held them in place. "And Pluto's not a planet anymore. But I love him anyway." Jack smiled wide, washing his hands. "Perfect, Mia. You're right about Pluto." Then, quiet as a whisper, he pulled out his phone. The lock screen glittered with notifications: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the firestorm waiting beyond this little kitchen. He stared at it, thumb hovering over the icon, wanting to know, even as dread curled in his gut. Mia climbed onto a stool beside him. "Daddy, are you reading me a bedtime story tonight?" He swallowed. Pressing the power button, he silenced the world. "How about we make up our own story?" Her grin lit the room. "Yes." Jack picked her up, and she nestled against his chest, curling her fingers around his apron. They settled on the couch, legs tangled, and he recited a tale of an astronaut and a brave little star, each line punctuated by Mia's delighted, "Again, Daddy." For now, the digital roar could wait. Here in the amber glow of their apartment lamp, there were constellations to name, imaginary worlds to explore, and a daughter's fearless heart to protect. And as Mia's eyelids drooped and she drifted into sleep, Jack laid her gently in bed, whispered, "I love you," and left the phone face down on the nightstand, its screen dark, its noise silenced until the morning would come. Victoria Kane sat on the edge of her velvet-piped couch, the city lights of Manhattan flickering like distant stars below her penthouse windows. In her lap glowed her tablet, replaying the same 60-second clip on a silent loop, a waiter in a crisp white shirt, unwavering gaze telling her, "I won't serve your anger." Each replay stripped another layer of her polish, exposing something raw she'd spent a lifetime burying. She'd first seen the clip in the taxi on her way home, her assistant's urgent text reading, "You need to see this." At first she dismissed it as another viral outburst, another moment of chaos to be smoothed over with rehearsed apologies and damage control. But now that it was in her hands, the moment felt too precise, too personal. Her breath caught at the waiter's calm insistence, his quiet conviction echoing in the cavernous penthouse. Before she could close the video, the door opened and her chief of staff, Martin Leach, swept in face-taut. Behind him trailed Isabella Chen, her publicist, and Jonas Reyes, head of investor relations. None of them dared sit. They stood like anxious statues around the coffee table. Victoria Martin began, voice low. "Why won't you apologize?" His question hung in the air uncomfortably. He unfurled a slim folder and tapped to a page filled with graphs, showing a steep drop in share price. "The roadshow's in 3 days. The IPO roadshow. Investors are spooked. Mentions of #serve respect are trending in pre-market chatter." Victoria closed her eyes. She'd seen the numbers herself, but she bristled at Martin's tone as if he believed her only job was to placate markets. "I won't apologize for a truth I can't refute," she said, keeping her voice even. "I won't frame my anger as unprofessional when it exposed a culture of entitlement that punches down hard." Isabella stepped forward, her stilettos clicking against the marble floor. She rested her designer-clad hip against the couch arm. "You built a reputation on precision, Victoria. You can't simply deflect. We need a statement, an apology that frames this as stress under pressure shows your human side. Maybe reference your upbringing, your charitable work." Charitable work. Victoria's own nonprofit was barely more than a tax write-off. She leaned forward, the city lights tracing the line of her jaw. "My parents didn't send me to boarding school to learn how to craft apologies for being called out. They taught me to build something worth defending." Jonas cleared his throat, stepping into the fragile space between them. "With respect, if your board loses confidence, we may have to discuss alternative leadership. The terms of the backing are clear. You need to manage public perception. Otherwise, the IPO valuation could drop 10% by the morning." Victoria's chest tightened. Jonas meant well, but his words felt like a noose tightening around her identity. She stood pacing a deliberate path across the plush rug. "Are we doing this because you believe in our mission, or because you're terrified of a few tweets I didn't come this far to collapse under social media pressure?" Martin exhaled so loudly that Isabella flinched. "The mission only matters if we survive long enough to fund it. Do you want investors to see a CEO who stands by her principles, or one who sacrificed the company on the altar of pride?" His gaze went hard. "I'm not asking for a betrayal of your values. I'm asking you to protect everything you've built." Victoria halted by the panoramic window, looking down at the grid of streets. In that moment, she felt the weight of everyone who'd trusted her. Her employees, her board, her investors, and the stranger in a restaurant who had reminded her she was human. She touched the glass. "I don't want to manipulate them," she said quietly. "I want to earn their trust back." Isabella clicked her tongue, flipping to her phone. "Trust is earned through action, not silence. We draft a public letter, admit excessive stress, promise a review of workplace conduct, commit personal reflections on leadership, humanize you beyond the boardroom." Victoria shook her head. "No spin, no consultants, no media script. I'll speak for myself once at a press conference. I'll answer questions, hard ones. Everyone else can read what they want, but I'm done outsourcing my voice." A hush fell. Martin studied her face, searching for a compromise. "That's bold, risky, but maybe it's exactly what the world needs right now." Jonas's phone buzzed, another alert this time, a wave of sympathetic posts flooding in from unexpected corners. Tech founders, journalists, even a few of her major investors admitting they'd felt the sting of power behind the clip. Isabella leaned in, scrolling. "It's trending #real leadership now. The same clip is being shared as example of modern CEO accountability." Victoria exhaled and allowed herself a small, wry smile. "Let them share. I'll stand by what I said both then and now." She turned to each of them in turn. "Draft an all-hands announcement for tomorrow. I'll call a press conference at noon. No flattery, no euphemisms. I'll talk about anger, respect, and the culture we're building here, and then I'll lay out a plan for how we do better." Isabella nodded, relief and fascination mingling in her gaze. "I'll prepare the talking points, but expect curveballs. The press will test your resolve." Victoria stood a moment longer, heart pounding with adrenaline, not the heady thrill of victory, but that steady pulse of integrity. "I'll take the questions. Let's show them leadership isn't a scripted act, it's a hard conversation." Jonas's face softened. "It takes courage to walk into that fire." She turned away from the window and faced them, her posture unyielding in the soft chandelier glow. "Then let's light it up." That night, Victoria stood alone in her marble-clad bathroom, the clip still paused on her smartphone's screen. She watched Jack Harper's steady hand, the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere, the hush that fell faster than any rally of applause. A knot of shame and gratitude twisted in her chest. She unlocked her phone, hesitated, then tapped the video's share icon. Not to spread scandal, but to send it to one person. Miles Carter, a reporter who had covered her company since its inception. "I will answer for this tomorrow. Watch live at noon. VK." Below it, a draft of her speech glowed in a note. I was right to expect respect. I was wrong to withhold it. Today I choose vulnerability over vanity. She read the words, feeling their weight, knowing they were inadequate, but they were hers. Turning off the light, she lay awake imagining Jack's daughter sleeping under a solar system he'd built with care, imagining herself admitting before the world that a CEO could learn empathy from a waiter's stand. The city hummed beyond her window, unaware that true change had already begun in the humble defiance of dignity and in the choice to confront one's own reflection without flinching. Victoria Kane stepped through Argento's polished mahogany doors like any other patron, but tonight the hush that greeted her felt different. Not the reverence reserved for her name, but a cautious curiosity. She wore no designer gown, only a tailored black coat over a simple silk blouse and dark trousers. No flanking aides, no whispered introductions. Just her. The maitre d' paused mid-step, then inclined his head. "Miss Kane," he murmured, and led her through the candlelit expanse past tables where silverware gleamed like starlight to a quiet alcove near the back. Jack Harper stood at the threshold, apron replaced by a crisp white shirt and tie. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he'd been waiting all evening. When their eyes met, the tension from their first encounter melted into something softer, an unspoken agreement that this was neither a confrontation nor a performance, but an invitation. "Good evening," Jack said, voice low and warm. He gestured to the table set for two, the linen perfectly pressed, the flicker of a single taper casting dancing shadows on crystal and china. "Good evening," Victoria replied, slipping into her seat. She paused, letting the moment stretch. The distant hum of cutlery and muted conversation felt miles away, as though time itself had softened. Jack drew a bottle of red from a side table. "May I?" he asked, offering her the label. It was a modest vintage, a wine he'd recommended to her team months ago, a bottle she'd never had the chance to try. She nodded, and Jack poured the first glass with careful reverence, the dark liquid catching the candlelight like liquid garnet. They sipped in silence, each tasting more than tannins and oak. Victoria set her glass down and met his gaze. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. Jack inclined his head. "Thank you for coming." He placed a salad before her, farmer's greens with shaved fennel citrus segments and toasted almonds. "I thought you might appreciate something light," he said. She nodded and took a delicate forkful. The crisp sweetness of grapefruit and the sharp bite of fennel seemed to unlock something, and Victoria exhaled softly. "You know," she began, her voice steady but intimate, "I've spent most of my life hiding behind precision, perfect pitches, flawless execution, measured responses. I built every fortress I could, convinced it protected me. But that night," she paused, tracing the rim of her glass. "When you refused my anger, I felt those walls crack." Jack watched her expression open. "It wasn't anger I refused," he said. "It was disrespect. And I recognized the fear behind it." She studied his face, surprised at how gently he held her truth. "I've been running from fear forever," she confessed. "Fear of being seen as weak. Fear that if I lowered my guard, I'd be swept away by chaos." A tremor touched her voice. "But what I felt when you stood there, it wasn't fear. It was something I haven't allowed myself in years, relief." Jack laid down his napkin and leaned forward, eyes earnest. "You showed up tonight without an audience," he said. "That's bravery." Victoria managed a small smile. "And you showed up without flinching." She raised her glass and he touched his to hers in a gentle toast. To showing up. They moved on to the main course, a petite filet served medium rare accompanied by roasted root vegetables and a velvety potato puree. Jack poured more wine and waited until she tasted it. When she nodded her approval, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction and something more profound, a quiet joy at sharing a familiar ritual without pretense. Conversation flowed then, unhurried and curious. Jack told her about his daughter Mia, who had an uncanny talent for building elaborate Lego spaceships. Victoria listened, her features softening as he described the tiny astronaut figures Mia insisted on including for every intergalactic voyage. "She says that if there are no stars, astronauts get lost," Jack explained. "I told her it's your job to build the stars for them." Victoria smiled, the first genuine one since their clash. "I like that. I wish someone had built stars for me." Jack paused, pressing his fingertips together. "I think you've built enough stars for everyone else." Her eyes glistened. But not for yourself. The candle flickered between them as Victoria exhaled. I've spent so long rescuing my company, my investors, my reputation. I forgot what it felt like to be rescued by a simple act of kindness. She sipped her wine. Tonight feels like a rescue. Jack's warm gaze held hers. You deserve kindness. She studied him for a moment, letting the words settle. Outside, the city pulsed with bright ambition. Here she felt something deeper: compassion, without expectation, respect without calculation. Over dessert, a shared plate of dark chocolate mousse and fresh berries they unearthed, memories softened by time. Victoria spoke of her childhood in foster homes, of learning early that affection could be transactional. Jack listened, offering no cliché consolation, only presence. In turn, he spoke of his years teaching ninth-grade history before life rerouted him to the service industry to support Mia's treatment during her mother's illness. Victoria's empathy deepened here, was a man who had carried profound loss without a shred of bitterness. The last candle guttered low, casting gentle warmth across their faces. Jack poured a final measure of wine. I've never met anyone who could be so powerful and still so tender, he said. Victoria's smile was fragile, a wisp of vulnerability. I've never known tenderness from someone in power, she replied. And until you spoke up, I didn't even realize how badly I needed it. They sat in companionable silence, the unspoken understanding binding them together, two survivors who had each fought silent battles deeper than any corporate conflict or restaurant altercation. In the hush, they found common ground: dignity, respect, and the courage to dismantle their own defenses. When the check arrived, Victoria reached for her wallet, instinctively, then paused. Jack caught her hand. Please, he said softly. Tonight was for both of us. She smiled, nodding, and allowed him the gesture. As they stood to leave, Jack offered her his coat. She slipped her arm through the sleeve and stepped into his gentle warmth. At the door, the maitre d' bowed but said nothing, and needed not to. Victoria and Jack walked out into the night side by side, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor, each carrying a quiet promise that respect once served could nourish even the most hardened hearts. The sun lingered low in the sky, painting Central Park's winding paths in molten gold, as Victoria Kane slipped away from the city's ceaseless hum. She'd promised herself a walk, just 10 minutes of quiet, but here, surrounded by rustling leaves and distant laughter, she felt the weight of her penthouse, her boardroom, and her mistakes begin to lift. Up ahead, a cluster of children darted between swings and slides, their shouts of joy echoing like music. One little girl in a pink jacket raced toward the jungle gym too fast, her foot catching on a protruding root. She pitched forward, and Victoria's breath caught. Without thinking, she hurdled a bench and reached the child's side in an instant. Victoria knelt, steadying the girl's trembling frame. Hey there, she said gently, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. You okay? That was quite a tumble. The child's face wrenched in tears, bottom lip quivering. For a moment, Victoria allowed herself to be simply the woman with soft hands and kind eyes, a role she hadn't played in years. I've got you, she whispered, lifting the girl into her arms. The little body flopped against her shoulder, and Victoria felt a fierce surge of protectiveness she hadn't known she was capable of. Victoria. A voice called out, crisp but warm. Jack Harper emerged from behind a grove of oaks, a brown paper grocery tote slung over his shoulder. He hurried forward, concern etched on his face. I thought I heard... He stopped when he saw the child in Victoria's arms, her cheek pressed against Victoria's coat. Is she hurt? He asked. Victoria straightened gently, rocking the girl. I don't think so, she said, voice soft, just shaken. The girl sniffled, reaching up to wipe her eyes on Victoria's sleeve. Sorry, Mommy, she whimpered. Jack knelt beside them. Hi there, he said gently to the child, noticing her pink boots scuffed with dirt. I'm Jack. That was quite a fall. He offered his hand and the girl grasped it, peeking at him with wide, cautious eyes. Victoria handed the girl to Jack and stepped back. Thank you, she said, voice catching in her throat. Jack smiled as he tucked the grocery bag under his arm and stood the child clinging to his fingers. No thanks needed, he said. You did the right thing. He turned to the girl. Let's Let's sit on that bench and see if you'd like a bandage or maybe a little apple. The child nodded, and Jack led her gently toward a nearby bench. As Jack settled her on the bench and began rummaging in his tote for a small first aid kit, Victoria watched a warmth blooming in her chest. Without her designer suit, without her boardroom veneer, she felt oddly out of place and profoundly connected. Jack looked up and caught her eye. "Want to join us?" he called over, offering her an apple from his tote. The girl shook her head, but Victoria stepped forward, accepting the fruit. She sat beside Jack, who tore a slice and handed it to the little girl. "Her name's Emma," Jack said, glancing at Victoria. "She's 8, just like Mia." His voice softened with that mention, and Victoria realized the depths beneath his calm compassion. "My daughter's Mia, too," Victoria found herself saying, surprising them both. 8 years old. Jack's eyes widened in recognition. "Of course you told me about her." He offered her a half apple. She nodded gratefully, taking a careful bite. For a few moments, they simply shared the bench, Jack with Emma, perched on his knee, Victoria beside him, peeling her apple slice. The late afternoon light settled around them, turning every stray leaf gold. Finally, Emma hiccuped. Jack wrapped a bandage around her scraped knee. Victoria watched as Jack worked, admiring the gentle precision of his movements. When he was done, he pressed a tiny kiss to Emma's forehead. "All set," he said. Emma's tears had dried, replaced by a small, triumphant smile. Victoria leaned forward, extending her hand. Emma took it, inspecting the fine lines of Victoria's palm as if it were a new map. "Thank you," the girl said softly. Victoria smiled. "You're welcome, Emma. Be careful next time." "Okay." Emma hopped off Jack's knee and stood brushing the bandage. "Okay." She ran to catch up with 2 girls who had been watching from the swings, their faces alight with admiration. As Emma disappeared, Jack let out a breath. "She's brave," he said, packing the first aid kit away. Victoria nodded. "She reminded me how it feels to be taken care of." She looked at Jack, eyes earnest. "I've been so focused on controlling everything, I forgot what it is to let someone else step in." Jack studied her. "We all need help sometimes." He hefted his grocery tote. "Speaking of which, I better get home. Mia's making a solar system for school. Venus is supposed to be purple, you know." Victoria laughed. "Purple Venus?" "Of course." He offered her the grocery bag. "Want to walk back together? I've got extra snacks in here if Emma's friends got hungry." She hesitated, then accepted. Together they rose from the bench lungs, filling with the sweet, crisp air of early evening. Victoria tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and fell into step beside him on the winding path. Jack swung his tote casually at his side. "I never took my daughter to this park," he confessed. "We always stuck closer to home." Victoria glanced at him, curious. "Your wife? Did she like parks?" Jack's expression grew distant for a moment. "She loved them. She used to push Mia on the swings until she was dizzy. Then they'd lie in the grass and point out shapes in the clouds." Victoria's voice softened. "I'm sorry." Jack shook his head. "I'm here now. That's what matters." They walked in companionable silence, the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant call of a street musician blending into a gentle soundtrack. As they reached the park's edge, Victoria paused. "Thank you," she said, voice low. Jack turned. "For what?" "For reminding me how to care." He cocked an eyebrow. "I thought we were the reminder." He nodded toward the path ahead. "Come on. Purple Venus awaits." Victoria chuckled, feeling lighter than she had in months. They walked on, Victoria's hand brushing against Jack's sleeve, 2 people who'd found an unexpected kinship in the quiet spaces between obligations and titles. In that simple stroll through a playground beneath the canopy of a city that never sleeps, Victoria Kane glimpsed a new way forward, not as a CEO cloaked in power, but as a woman capable of tenderness and trust. And beside her, Jack Harper carried more than a grocery tote. He carried the fragile promise of kindness they would both learn to keep. The smell of charred dough and melting cheese greeted Victoria Kane the moment she stepped through Jack Harper's front door. The little living room was wrapped in the glow of a cartoon marathon. Bright colors flickering across mismatched couches, and the table was already strewn with plates, napkins, and a slightly lopsided, smoke-scarred pizza freshly pulled from the oven. "Welcome to pizza night," Jack announced, balancing a fresh slice on a paper plate. He wore an apron speckled with sauce, and Mia Jack's 8-year-old daughter sat beside him in her pajamas, legs folded under her on the couch. Rule number 1, try at least one bite, even if it's blacker than a burnt offering. Victoria hesitated in the doorway, clutching her coat. The tension she carried from boardrooms and headlines felt out of place here among singed slices and cartoon sound effects. But Mia beamed at her eyes bright behind a wall of brown curls. "Come on, Ms. Kane," she urged in her sweet, unguarded way. "It's fun." Jack motioned to the plate in his hand. "I promise nothing will explode unless you count the look on your face." He handed Victoria the slice. She took it, smelling the tang of tomato sauce and charred crust. True to his word, the slice looked a little worse for wear, edges, blackened cheese congealed in odd patches. But it held a promise of warmth of home. Victoria sank onto the couch opposite Mia, raising an eyebrow. "Obligatory bite?" she asked, nodding at the slice. "Mandatory." Jack confirmed with mock solemnity. Victoria took a careful nibble. The crust crackled under her teeth, a smoky bite giving way to gooey cheese and sweet tart tomato. She closed her eyes for a moment, caught by a curious comfort. Jack grinned. "Rule 2, no phones at the table." Mia's eyes danced. She plunged her hand into a bowl of popcorn and tossed a kernel at Jack. "You almost knocked over the TV with your phone," she teased, and Jack held up his hands in surrender. Victoria set her phone face down on a nearby end table. It felt like surrendering a shield she'd carried too long. The resistance hit her in a gentle rush, an odd relief. "Rule 3, Jack said, leaning forward. "You have to laugh at least once." Mia hopped off the couch and held out her hand. "Dance break," she declared, dragging Jack to his feet. He obliged, gyrating in a goofy circle to the tune on screen. Mia clapped, then looked at Victoria expectantly. The corners of Victoria's mouth trembled, and she tried to resist, but Mia's enthusiasm was contagious. With a half shrug, Victoria rose and joined the improvised dance, 2 quick steps a spin. It was clumsy and sweet, and for a split second she glimpsed herself as someone unburdened by titles or expectations. A genuine laugh burst from her lips, bright and real. "Success!" Jack announced, dropping back onto the couch. Mia flopped onto his lap, breathless. Victoria settled back, cheeks warm. They spent the next hour like that, sharing stories between slices. Mia talked about her school play, how she'd forgotten her lines and made up a song instead. Jack teased her about the song's questionable tune, and Victoria found herself laughing again, the sound unfamiliar but thrilling. At one point, Jack reached for the remote and switched to a cooking show. "Check this out," he said. "Even pros burn things sometimes." Victoria watched the chef's deliberate, confident hands ruin a perfect dish and then salvage it with laughter. She realized she'd spent decades striving for perfection, forgetting that mistakes could become moments of connection. Mia yawned, her eyelids heavy. Jack scooped her into his arms and carried her to the nearby armchair where she'd fallen asleep mid-laugh, the pizza sauce still smudged on her cheek. Jack's careful movements were tender. He didn't rush the moment. Victoria stood to help, brushing a stray curl from Mia's face. "She's exhausted," she murmured. Jack nodded. "Pizza night takes its toll." Victoria paused by the doorway as Jack set Mia gently on a pile of blankets. She looked at Jack, at the man who had taught his daughter to find joy in burnt crust and cartoon mishaps, and felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a boardroom win or a viral headline. It was a small, profound truth about belonging. Jack turned, catching her gaze. "Thank you," she said simply. He shrugged, his warm smile disarming. "For what?" "For letting me in," she whispered. He stepped closer, guiding her back to the now quiet living room. "You're always welcome at pizza night," he said. Victoria sank onto the couch again, eyeing the half-eaten slices. She picked one up and held it out to Jack. "Your turn," she said. He accepted it, and together they took a bite, 2 mismatched, imperfect people sharing a simple moment of connection. No subheadings, no bullet points, just 2 people learning that real strength lies in laughter, in burned edges, and in the courage to belong. And as the credits rolled on the cartoon, Victoria realized she'd never felt more at home. The conference room was colder than the ice bar at Argento, all glass and steel, and the soft hum of conditioned air. Victoria Kane's heels clicked against the polished floor as she took her seat at the head of the table. 10 faces greeted her, board members, advisors, and half a dozen worried-looking investors whose furrowed brows spoke louder than any protest. The afternoon light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting streaks of gold across the uptown skyline. But inside, the mood was anything but bright. Margot Levine, her newest board member and former CFO of a major hedge fund, cleared her throat. Victoria, your viral incident has tanked our sentiment scores. We've had 2 major clients pause contracts and multiple analysts downgrade our outlook. You need to go public with a sincere apology crafted by PR delivered on camera. It's the only way to steady the ship. Victoria listened, pen untouched in her hand, as the room's tension coalesced around her like a storm cloud. Nick Haynes. Her VP of Operations exchanged anxious glances with the legal counsel. One by one, they tapped keyboards, shuffled papers, adjusted ties, agitated rituals of the corporate world. When Margot paused, Victoria's lips curved into a calm, deliberate smile that registered on no sentiment chart. "Thank you for outlining the scenario, Margot," she said, voice pitched low enough to command the room's full attention. "But I'm not here for damage control." A ripple of surprised murmurs rose. The lead investor, a man named Carter Sinclair, leaned forward. "With respect, Victoria, that's exactly what we need. A course correction, a statement acknowledging poor judgment, and moving on." Victoria allowed her gaze to pass over each person at the table as though cataloging their doubt. Then she folded her hands on the sleek surface. "I understand the impulse," she began to package this into an apology tour, "but I refuse to lead with words that ring hollow. My rant in that steakhouse wasn't born from bravado. It was a breakdown of empathy in me that I can't pretend didn't happen." A frown flickered across Carter Sinclair's face. "So you won't apologize?" "I'll apologize," Victoria said, her tone sharpening, "but not in the way you prescribe. I won't stand in front of a camera reading a script designed to mollify headlines. Instead, I intend to rebuild trust, one human at a time." The room fell silent. A flush of outrage surfaced on Nick's cheeks. "Victoria, with all due respect," he said, voice tight, "that approach will take years. Our stock can't wait for a grassroots redemption." Victoria's eyes flashed. "It doesn't have to be slow or sentimental. It simply has to be authentic. Starting tomorrow, I'm personally visiting our top 10 clients, not to smooth feathers, but to listen. Then I'll be in our tech labs partnering with engineers to mentor the next generation. I'll spend 1 day a week in cities where our users live, attending community meetups we'll sponsor. I want to meet people where they actually are." Margot let out a short laugh. "A tour of handshakes and listening sessions. That sounds unstructured." Victoria leaned forward, meeting Margot's gaze squarely. "Unstructured isn't the same as ineffectual. People know a scripted statement when they hear it. What they don't know is the sincerity of showing up, of choosing to be present rather than protected by PR walls. Can we really claim leadership if we hide behind corporate spokespeople?" An uneasy shuffle greeted her words. "This is a tech company, not a nonprofit," Carter Sinclair intoned. "Perception drives valuation. You must appreciate the stakes." Victoria nodded. "I do. The stakes are high enough that I'm willing to risk perception for a chance at something more durable than a temporary sentiment bump. I built this company on solving real problems for real people. I won't abandon that mission for the fleeting comfort of a scripted apology." Nick cleared his throat. "Your bravery is admirable, but it might cost us the IPO." His voice softened on the last word, as though saying IPO aloud felt like uttering a fragile secret. Victoria gave him a steady look. "Our IPO won't mean much if the foundation we stand on is the illusion of leadership rather than its practice. We can emerge from this setback stronger because we didn't just say sorry, we chose to act differently." Behind her, the wall-mounted screen flickered with stock charts, social media feeds still buzzing, #serve respect. A few board members met her gaze, their skepticism abating into grudging curiosity. Margot exhaled, folding her arms. "And if the stock drops another 5 points, Victoria's lips curved into a quiet smile. "Then we'll double down on our presence. I'd rather face a temporary dip in valuation than perpetuate a hollow narrative while our people lose faith. Leadership isn't measured only by share price, it's measured by the trust of those we serve. I intend to earn that back, one conversation, one community, one user at a time." Silence stretched. Finally, Carter Sinclair leaned back, assessing her with the cool calculation of a chess master. "Very well," he said, voice low. "You have 2 days before the board meets again. Show us the first steps of this human-first strategy. Victoria inclined her head. Thank you. You'll see results before our next meeting. As the boardroom emptied, Victoria lingered, gazing out at the sun-drenched skyline. Nick fell into step beside her. I still think this is risky, he admitted. She turned. All the best things are, but I believe it's the only way to lead with integrity. Nick nodded, the faintest trace of respect softening his features. I'll pencil in your client visits. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. Thank you. The next morning, she boarded a train to meet a small startup that had paused its investment in her company. Later that week, she visited a coding workshop for underprivileged teens, volunteering alongside Jack Harper himself. Each handshake, each genuine conversation became a building block, an emerging blueprint for leadership in a world hungry for authenticity. No scripted statements, no hollow promises, just a CEO willing to be human first, proving that true trust is rebuilt not in boardrooms but in countless small moments of empathy and presence. The grand ballroom of the Midtown Children's Literacy Gala shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers. Long banquet tables curved around a raised stage, and the polished oak floor reflected the soft glow of candlelight flickering in silver votives. Parents dined on artfully plated courses, philanthropists exchanged quiet compliments, and local news cameras hovered at the perimeter, capturing everyone from the city's social set to the best-known children's authors. At the center of it all stood Victoria Kane, poised behind a gleaming mahogany podium, ebony-clad and confident, as the room fell into hushed expectancy. She cleared her throat, eyes sweeping the crowd. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice warm and steady. Tonight we raise funds to give every child the chance to learn to read and to fall in love with words the way they deserve. Polite applause fluttered around the room. To cap this evening, I'd like to offer something unique. A subtle smile touched her lips. A private dinner with me wherever you choose, whenever you choose, no agenda, no formalities, just conversation. All proceeds go directly to literacy initiatives in underfunded communities. The bandleader waved his cue, and a single spotlight illuminated a large photograph of Victoria and Jack Harper sharing that first candlelit meal at Argento. Laughter rippled through the audience as she set a bespoke placard on the stage, Dinner with Victoria Kane. The auctioneer, a debonair veteran named Lawrence Finch, took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he called, we'll start the bidding at $50,000. A wave of excitement rippled. Hands shot up around the room, tuxedoed financiers, well-heeled art collectors, board members looking to burnish their own philanthropic sheen. 70,000, 90,000, 100,000. Each bid was met with applause, the numbers climbing like fireworks trailing across the night sky. Meanwhile, Jack stood against the far wall, framed by a towering floral arrangement. His crisp white shirt was hidden beneath a dark overcoat, his salt and pepper hair slicked back. He gripped the edge of the molding, his knuckles whitening as he watched numbers climb past 150,000. A hush fell as a wealthy hedge fund manager's bid of 200,000 resonated in the rafters. Just then, Jack stepped forward, navigating polished tables to reach the front. At the podium, he nodded respectfully to Lawrence. 250,000, he said softly, but clearly, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. A stunned murmur swept the crowd. The hedge fund manager's hand froze midair. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses, scanning Jack's face. Sir, he began. Jack took a breath. I'll give $250,000. And my philanthropy isn't a facade. I guarantee every cent goes directly to the children's reading programs. A ripple of incredulous applause followed. On the stage, Victoria's eyes widened before she smiled, a genuine blend of surprise and gratitude. The room erupted as Jack sealed the bid. Cameras flashed, capturing the improbable moment, a waiter in plain clothes outbidding the city's wealthiest. Tears welled in the eyes of volunteers at the front table. Parents hugged their children. For a heartbeat, the veneer of high society cracked wide, replaced by a shared recognition of something real. After the applause died down, Victoria stepped up beside Jack. She offered her hand, and he accepted, raising it gently as the crowd cheered. Her voice broke the warmth. I am humbled, and I want everyone here to know your bid isn't just money. It's a stand for respect, dignity, and belief in every human story. She turned to Jack. Thank you for reminding us that genuine generosity isn't about photo ops or headlines. It comes from the heart. Jack nodded, swallowing a lump of emotion. He'd used the life insurance payout meant to secure his daughter Mia's future savings from his late wife's policy to make this moment possible. He'd never spoken of those savings aloud. Tonight, their silent sacrifice was finally given purpose. He whispered to Victoria, "I want to ensure that children whose parents can't afford books still grow up seeing stories as windows, not luxuries." Around them, guests wiped tears from their cheeks. Reporters jostled forward for a statement. Social media influencers live-streamed scenes of raw humanity. In that floodlight of attention, Jack and Victoria stood shoulder to shoulder, two strangers from different worlds bound by shared conviction. Later, as the gala wound down, volunteer teams collected checks, tallied totals, and scheduled book distributions. Outside, the night air was brisk, but inside, hearts were warmed by the promise of thousands of new readers. Jack slipped away with Victoria to a quiet corridor. She rested her hand on his arm, voice low and sincere. "You did this not for glory, but for kids." "I've never been prouder." Jack managed a weary smile. "I just couldn't let tonight be another charade. Nobody should ever have to bid for respect." Behind him, the grand doors closed against a surge of well-wishers and photographers, leaving them alone in that empty hallway, the echoes of the evening's triumph still vibrating in the marble walls. As they parted ways beneath the soft glow of an exit sign, Jack knew that his gesture had done more than raise funds. It had grounded a CEO's empathy, reminded a city that generosity is measured in moments of authenticity, and shown every child that respect and a good story was worth more than any price tag. He walked into the night, his faith in humanity renewed by the knowledge that sometimes the simplest act of kindness can change every life in the room. The morning headlines felt like cold rain. As Jack Harper turned on his phone over coffee at the diner counter, every screen was ablaze with the same accusation: Kane Harper PR plot exposed. Beneath the glossy photos of last night's gala, a tuxedoed Jack shaking hands with Victoria Kane. The bidding paddle still gleaming in his hand ran a tidal wave of skepticism. Blog posts conjectured that Jack was a paid actor, Victoria's generosity a carefully choreographed spectacle to resurrect her image. Even some local news anchors, their voices dripping with faux outrage, insisted the dinner had been nothing more than a stiletto-sharp stunt. Jack set his cup down, the ceramic clatter loud in the cramped kitchen. Behind the counter, Sarah Bennett wiped down the espresso machine, her brow tight with worry. "They've even dug up your old teaching credentials," she muttered, "saying you quit under mysterious circumstances." He shrugged, drained his coffee, and offered a half-smile. "Let them talk." But the whispers followed him through breakfast service, curling around tables like steam. Patrons shot sidelong glances. Some smiled encouragingly, but others watched him as if expecting him to break character at any moment. Jack moved through the dining room on autopilot, greeting regulars, plating omelets, clearing the table where a pair of suited investors hesitated to tip. He didn't read the stories, but he felt their heat the moment he clocked out. Back in the alley behind Argenta Victoria was waiting beside her sleek black sedan. No chauffeur, no entourage. Just her. Her expression was drawn, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Jack paused, wiping his hands on his apron. "It's gotten worse," she said without preamble. He nodded. "The more real it was, the more they'll try to fake it." She closed her eyes as though bracing herself against a gust of wind. "I never wanted this. I wanted to do the right thing, not manufacture headlines." Jack studied her in the cold light of early afternoon. She looked smaller than he'd ever seen her, less the titan of industry, more the woman who once hid behind boardroom doors. "What matters isn't what they believe," he said, voice gentle. "It's what you believe." She swallowed. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid they'll smear me so badly I lose the chance to rebuild anything real. My board's calling for damage control, more scripted statements. Investors are threatening to pull out." Jack leaned against the car, hands folded. "So let them pull out. You started your company on grit and vision, not on tickers. You can't lead from a flashlight when you've got a sun inside you." Victoria looked at him, the hard lines of her face softening. "That was the worst of it," she whispered. "I forgot I had a son." A beat passed between them. only the distant hum of rush hour traffic and the faint scent of roasting coffee from a nearby cafe. "Come with me," Jack said, lifting his chin toward the diner's back door. "Let's get out of the headlines for a bit." She followed him inside and they slipped into the storeroom behind the kitchen. Stacks of boxes, crates of produce, aging janitorial supplies crowded the cramped space. It smelled of onions and bleach, comforting in its mundanity. Jack closed the door. "This is where I hide when the world gets too loud," he said, leaning against a shelf. He reached into his apron pocket and brought out 2 paper-wrapped sandwiches. Egg salad. Victoria's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Only if you still make it with too much mayo," she teased. He handed her the sandwich. Guilty. But this old recipe never fails. They sat on overturned crates unwrapping paper in silence. Each bite was a reminder that some things good sandwiches' quiet moments needed no certification. Victoria sighed. "I hate that you're caught up in my mess." He reached across the narrow aisle and took her hand. "You're not the only one under siege. I've been under siege since I told Victoria Kane I wouldn't serve her anger, but this feels different." She looked at him earnest and vulnerable. "Because you used your wife's insurance money at that auction?" He stiffened at the reminder of his late wife's policy and his silent sacrifice for the gala bid that night. He nodded. It was the only way to prove it wasn't a stunt. But now they'll spin even that. Victoria's gaze turned steady, resolute. "Then let them spin. I'll confirm every dollar to the charities publish, every bank statement, invite them to audit it. I'll stand in the light and show them what faith looks like when it's not for sale." Jack squeezed her hand. "That's the Victoria I respect." She exhaled as if unburdening years of expectation. "Promise me something," she asked, voice quiet. "Anything. Promise you'll stay through the chaos, through the headlines, if I keep choosing honesty over optics." He smiled a warm, slow smile that reached his eyes. "I've already promised that, whether you asked or not." They sat there in the storeroom, the world outside churning with rumors. But inside, 2 people leaned into the quiet, drawing strength from each other's conviction. In that unguarded moment, Jack realized that reputation was nothing without integrity. And Victoria discovered that vulnerability was the most potent form of leadership. They finished their sandwiches in companionable silence, the musty air of the storeroom a sanctuary from the glare of publicity. When they emerged, daylight had softened into afternoon. They walked out together, 2 unlikely allies ready to face the storm once more, hand in hand, unwavering in their pursuit of something far more enduring than any headline. Jack Harper pushed open the scuffed glass door of Chapter 1, the Little Queen's Literacy Center he and Victoria Kane had dreamed into existence, and paused to take in the scene. Morning light slanted through mismatched curtains, dust motes dancing in its glow. Along the pale yellow walls, children's fingerprints formed a twisting mural of leaves and branches, 1020. 100 tiny prints in every hue of tempera paint. Beneath it, second-hand books lined sagging shelves, dog-eared picture books, tattered. Chapter novels donated dictionaries with frayed spines. It wasn't fancy, it was home. Already families were trickling in. A pair of twin boys chased each other past the reading nook, giggling as they chased an over-enthusiastic dog owned by the center's part-time volunteer. A grandmother in a well-worn coat shepherded her granddaughter toward a low table where Mia Harper Jack's 8-year-old daughter sat with a stack of picture books and a pencil in hand. Jack ducked his head into the back office, where Victoria carefully arranged a row of mismatched chairs for the morning story hour. Her suit jacket was draped over the back of one, its lining embroidered with the words, "Begin again" in delicate script. She didn't look up when he entered, but he felt her shift beside him. "Looks like your grandmother's brought reinforcements," he said softly, nodding toward the door. Victoria let out a breathless laugh. And coffee mystery donor left a huge thermos next to the coat rack. Jack wandered back into the main room just as Mia cleared her throat. He crouched by her side. "Ready," he murmured. Mia looked up, her dark eyes bright with the seriousness of a child who knows her audience. "Yes. Today I'm reading The Little Engine That Could." She picked up the battered book, its title printed in curling letters across the cover. She turned 3 pages with careful fingers, then began, I think I can, her voice small but unwavering. Parents settled onto beanbags and folding chairs, and even the dog sat with surprising dignity at their feet. The twins scampered back, plopped down beside a young mother who held them close. In the back, Sarah Bennett, Jack's former boss at Argentu, whispered the familiar refrain of pride. "That's his girl." Victoria knelt at the front, her arms wrapped around her knees. She closed her eyes and Jack saw her shoulders relax. She listened as if each word Mia spoke was a gift. When Mia reached the triumphant end, I thought I could, the center erupted in gentle applause. Jack joined in, sweeping his gaze across faces filled with hope. After story hour, Mia bounded over to her father and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You were perfect," Jack whispered, tousling her hair. Mia beamed. Victoria stepped forward, a warm smile lighting her face. "Jack, the twins want you to read next." He exchanged a glance with Mia, permission granted, and took the stage. He opened one of the donated chapter books, a well-worn mystery novel with illustrations of magnifying glasses and dusty footprints. He read a few paragraphs about a clever young detective, his voice low and animated. The children leaned in, enraptured. As the morning wore on, the center filled with the soft hum of community. A father coached his son through sounding out CAT. A grandmother sketched pictures in a coloring corner. A new immigrant mother practiced English phrases with another volunteer. Somewhere behind the shelves, a handful of soccer coaches had repurposed the storage closet into a makeshift meeting room, planning weekend tutoring sessions. Jack traded places with Victoria for a moment. She guided a family through the donation process, one hardback book per person, please, and accepted each gift with genuine gratitude. A little girl shyly handed over her favorite bedtime story. Victoria knelt, accepted it with a gentle thank you, and they shared a proud smile. Jack watched her, thinking how far they'd come. Not long ago, Victoria sat behind a conference table in a penthouse, cold and unapproachable. Now she knelt in the dustiest corner of a former hardware store, laughter in her eyes. During a lull, Jack found Sarah tending the coffee station mugs stacked crookedly on a folding table. "You see how she took to this?" he asked, nodding toward Victoria, who was reading aloud to two small siblings. Sarah nodded, cradling a steaming cup. "I never thought I'd see her read to kids. She's changed." Chapter 1. Right? Jack tapped the sign hanging crookedly by a nail. "Every beginning needs a first chapter." Sarah smiled, her eyes misting. "It's a beautiful start." Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the stoop. A new family arrived, a mother and two children who spoke little English. Victoria stepped out to greet them. Jack joined her. She knelt in the dirt beside the mother, using simple words to explain what they did here: reading, writing, belonging. The children's faces brightened, and soon they came inside to find books in their own language. Jack leaned back against the doorframe, heart full. These were voices that had no place at Argento's polished tables, but found a home here. He glanced at Victoria, who rose and dusted off her jeans as she led the family inside. They moved through the center as equals, hand in hand, not CEO and waiter, but two people building something new. By late afternoon, the center emptied, save for a small circle of volunteers finishing cleanup. Jack and Victoria sat on the front step, sipping lukewarm coffee from chipped mugs. Mia lay on a blanket, curled up with a picture book already halfway to dreamland. The fingerprint mural glowed behind them in the fading light. Victoria sighed a slow, contented breath. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed this," she said quietly, leaning back on her elbows. The smell of old books, the sound of someone learning for the first time. Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "This place needed you, and you needed this place." She leaned into him. "I'm starting to believe that." They sat in companionable silence, the everyday noise of the city softened by distance and purpose. As the sun dipped low, it painted the mural in warm golds and reds. Jack thought of how a single stand in a Manhattan steakhouse had set all this in motion, how courage can echo far beyond the moment it's spoken. Mia stirred on the blanket and lifted her head. "Daddy, can we read one more story tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. Jack smiled and kissed her forehead. "Every day, kiddo, every single day." Victoria reached down to tousle Mia's hair. "And I'll be there too, I promise." Mia closed her eyes, comforted by the promise. Jack took a last look at Chapter 1, at the fingerprints, the books, the scattered crayons on the floor, and felt a surge of pride. They had stripped away the trappings of titles and accolades to find something far more precious, a community bound by respect, kindness, and second chances. As the evening shadows lengthened, Jack and Victoria rose and locked the front door behind them. They walked off the stoop side by side, their steps light, their hearts certain. Chapter 1 wasn't just a name, it was a beginning of hope, of healing, and of lives rebuilt one page at a time. Sunlight filtered through the large front windows of Chapter 1, painting the mismatched chairs and weathered bookshelves in a soft glow. Children's laughter drifted in from the playground outside, where dozens of tiny graduates, former Chapter 1 students, bounded across the blacktop, clutching crayons and worksheets like victory flags. Inside, volunteers bustled, setting up folding tables draped in white cloth upon which lay trays of simple refreshments, lemonade in mason jars, homemade cookies, and fruit skewers. Jack Harper stood at the center of the room, heart pounding with anticipation. A year had passed since he and Victoria Kane opened these doors, and today wasn't a birthday party, it was their ceremony of truth. Every inch of the room bore witness to the year's journey, the fingerprint mural stretching across one wall, each print a promise. The low bookshelf groaning under donated tomes, the well-worn Chapter 1 sign still hanging crookedly above the entry. 10 minutes, Jack murmured, checking his watch. He smoothed the folds of his button-up shirt and glanced over his shoulder. Victoria stood near the tapestry frame, dark hair pinned back, wearing her simple silver phoenix pin, the symbol he had given her just weeks after the center's opening. Her eyes met his bright with 1,000 unspoken memories. He caught Victoria's hand as the final families trickled in, single parents in work uniforms, grandmothers with shopping bags slung over their shoulders. Children in hand-me-down jackets paused at the doorway. They all found seats facing the blank tapestry canvas that would soon be their collective testament. Marcy, their steadfast volunteer and former manager, tapped Jack lightly on the shoulder. "Everyone's here," she whispered. Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. He stepped forward, shaped his resolve into steady calm, and raised one hand to call the room to order. The murmurs settled, and the scattered clatter of chairs ceased like ripples fading from a pond. "Welcome, everyone." Jack began, voice warm yet unwavering. "A year ago, our walls were bare, our shelves empty. Most of us didn't even know where to start. But we made a promise to show up. Every day, through mess and mistake, through triumph and tumble, we showed up." Soft applause greeted him. He let it die down, letting the weight of the word "show up" settle in the hush. Then he turned toward Victoria, extending a small black velvet box. "Victoria Kane," he said, his voice firm with gratitude and awe, "you believed in this center before it had a single child's smile inside it. You risked everything, your title, your comfort, to build something real." He opened the box to reveal a delicate pin in the shape of a rising phoenix, its wings curved in mid-flame. "For you, a symbol of rebirth through courage." Victoria's breath caught. She reached out with trembling fingers to accept the pin, the metal cool against her skin. As Jack fastened it to her lapel, the room seemed to exhale in unison. Victoria's eyes shone with tears. "Thank you, Jack," she said, voice thick. She stepped forward and with careful hands slipped another gift onto him, a hand-stitched belt in deep midnight blue, its leather center embossed with the words, "Honor through healing." It was a belt unlike any martial arts ribbon, no rank, no hierarchy, just a circlet of respect and compassion. Jack slid it around his waist, pulling the laces snug. The room broke into heartfelt applause, not for a successful fundraiser or polished speech, but for two people who had chosen authenticity over acclaim. Victoria cleared her throat and Jack fell silent. She motioned toward the tapestry. Marcy pulled back the cloth to reveal a canvas already dotted with dozens of colored handprints, tiny fingers and adult palms pressed into paint, each marked with names and promises. "I will listen. I will forgive. I will not walk away." Adjacent were vows scrawled in bright marker. "I show up even if I'm scared. I choose kindness over fear. I will read to you." Victoria's voice, steady now, carried across the room. "This tapestry is our living record. It isn't about perfection, but presence. Every print here represents a moment someone chose community over comfort, And that right there, that is our greatest achievement. A hush fell as families traced their hands over the prints. A grandmother bent down to show her grandson where he'd added his green handprint months ago. Across the room, a teenager in a volunteer shirt traced his own silhouette, a shadow no longer anonymous. Jack spotted Mia shyly pressing her small palm next to her father's, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes. No politicians had spoken here, no corporate logos glared from the walls. This was raw humanity, a celebration of simple promises kept. Jack stepped forward again. Thank you all for trusting this space with your stories, for believing that respect can rebuild worlds. He scanned the faces that had once felt lost and now brimmed with possibility. Our work isn't done. Every day is a new beginning, but today we honor how far we've come and the courage it took to begin again. As the final echoes of his words faded, the children in the back rushed forward, reaching out to press fresh handprints beside the older ones. Volunteers passed out paint laughter, skipping across the floor. Parents helped toddlers dip fingers, wiping them carefully and guiding them to the canvas. Each new print added to the tapestry's vibrant story. Victoria and Jack stood side by side, watching. No need for grand speeches, this was celebration enough. They held hands, hearts beating in unison, because they knew that every handprint, every promise was proof respect and compassion could spark transformation far beyond a single room. When the sun dipped low, streaking the mural with golden light, the ceremony of truth drew to a close. No certificates were issued, no titles were reclaimed. But as families drifted into the joyful chaos of paint-smeared palms and heartfelt embraces. Chapter 1 lived up to its name. The first chapter of a story written by courage, kindness, and the unwavering decision to show up day after day, inked in color, bound by the simple power of a hand extended.